at 3:05 p.m. Just to get started, I'm going to just go through and call out the names, and you guys can introduce yourselves. We'll start with the applicant or the interviewee. Mr. Cantle. Is it Cantle or Cantel? Could you introduce yourself?
Yep, Cantel.
Okay, go ahead and introduce yourself. Don't go deep in your history. We'll ask a lot of questions about that later.
Sure. My name is Bill Cantel. I live in Brimfield. Resided here for 30 years. I've been self-employed for just over 30 years. 20 of that has been in the residential construction business. Back in 2018, I took a job in the town of Southbridge as a local inspector. I basically concentrated on 3 families and up, inspecting those on every 5-year inspection basis. And then businesses in assemblies over 50 people, also liquor license establishments once a year. While I was in there, I also took the job as the commissioner in Wales, Massachusetts, small town on the border of Mass and Connecticut. And during that time, I received my commissioner's license, Massachusetts commissioner's license, or certificate. Last September, I took a job in Brimfield, my hometown, as the commissioner, and I resigned from Southbridge at that time. And so now I'm part-time inspector in Brimfield in Wales. Actually, building commissioner and zoning official.
Okay.
That's pretty much my history as far as being a commissioner and zoning official.
All right. So next we'll go through Barre's Board of Selectmen. Most now know, but I am Matthew Urban, chairman of the Board of Selectmen, town of Barre. I do go by Matt, so don't worry about that. Next, we'll go to Greg.
Hi, Bill. My name is Greg O'Sullivan. Also a construction supervisor. Been on the select board now, just starting my 2nd term. And welcome.
Thank you.
Dylan.
Hi, Bill. Nice to meet you. My name is Dylan Clark. I'm the newest member of the select board, and I am the clerk. It's very nice to meet you and talk with you today.
Thank you. Same here.
Nancy.
Hi, everyone. It's Nancy Allen from the Town of Petersham Select Board, and also have been on the oversight committee with some of these folks since we went into the regional method. So thank you for putting this together, and nice to meet you, Bill.
Thank you. Same here.
And thank you for participating, Nancy.
Yeah, thank you, Matt.
I'm guessing you're pretty familiar with Heather.
Yes, we've gotten to know each other a little bit better within the last couple of months, a little more contact because of the COVID, unfortunately, for bad reasons, but nice to get the more contact.
Thank you. Sandy. I'm not sure if Bill recognizes, but Sandy is also online, and I'll give her a chance to introduce herself. Go ahead, Sandy. Maybe your microphone volume's down.
It's possible she may not have volume on that computer.
Okay. Well, I'll give a quick. Bill, Sandy Hood is our town administrator assistant. And so she and Heather are here kind of representing the town administrator's office and assisting with the documentation and minute record keeping.
They're our full-time personnel.
Okay.
Yes.
Anybody contacting the time. Yeah.
Heather, do you want to move Kenan.Young from an attendee over to a panelist?
Sure. So moved.
All right, Kenan, you would be the last person to introduce yourself to our applicant. If you would like, you have an opportunity to do that.
Is Mike, maybe?
Okay.
Okay. Go ahead, Kenan.
Kenan.Young, Board of Selectmen, Hardwick.
Thank you. And you may have missed Bill's introduction, but our applicant's name is Bill Cantel.
Yep.
And we are now all introduced. We have the entire Board of Selectmen from Barre, as well as Nancy Allen from Petersham on this call. What I'd like to propose is we kind of have a questionnaire spiel we'll go through for the interview process. And after we get through that, we would like to open it up more specifically for Nancy and Kenan to also have any comments or questions I might want to add to it, or follow up on any of the questions that were presented. Does that sound like it'll work for the two of you? I don't want to kind of set it up without kind of having agreement with the other town representatives.
That's fine.
Yeah, it sounds good, Matt.
Thank you. All right. Let's get started. So good afternoon, Bill. Thank you for joining us today to interview the Regional Building Commissioner position. We already went through some introductions. So we are currently being recorded and broadcast live on our YouTube channel and will later be replayed on local public access station. The interview will consist of 15 questions that we have divided up amongst the three members of the Barre Select Board. At the end of the interview, we would like to provide you with an opportunity to ask any questions you may have of us. For all questions, we will then thank you and ask you to depart the meeting while we discuss, and Heather will follow up with you based on any of the results of the interview. Do you have any other questions before we get into the questions from us to you?
No.
Okay. I'll start off, and generally the way we do this is each member of our board will ask one question. You can generally go through your whole answer. I will work with, but what I'm hoping to do right now is kind of just let you answer it. A lot of times we don't do a lot of back and forth during each question. This is where kind of some notes on the sides might help each individual interviewer follow up later. Are we all okay with that? I'll start with you, Greg. Are you okay with kind of I ask the question, he answers it, and then you ask your question and we just get through the questions before we go back and forth? Or do you want a little back and forth at each question?
I think it'd be easy to just discuss a question if anybody has any issues of conversation on it rather than jump back around and stay on topic.
Okay, all right, then I'll ask the question, Bill can answer, and then what I'll do is I'll rotate through each member of the interview group and see if they have any follow-up questions, and we'll work through it that way. So, question one, Bill, can you tell us about why you are interested in this position and what qualifications you would bring to this position?
Well, I'm interested in the area, number one. I think it's an excellent area to work. It's relatively close to my home. I did a trip up there just to track the time, and it's just under a 40-minute ride from my house. I live on the north side of Brimfield. I got to admit that it's probably the best commute anyone could ask for coming up through Brimfield way, Warren, the Brookfields, New Braintree, and into Barre. It's just an amazing area. I think I can say that I have experience in inspections and permit issuance, and I've been working in a small town for 30 years. So I think, having a little of experience in the big town of Southbridge, I realized that I just enjoy the quality of life in the small towns in the country much better. I think I can bring a lot of maybe organization. I'm not familiar with how your office was run before. I've never had to deal with any of the boards or any of the towns. I never built in any of them. So I don't know how, oh, I'm sorry, that's not true. I did. I was involved in a garage in Hardwick a few years ago. But I never met the inspector because it wasn't my job to do so at that time. But I just think I could bring a lot of coordination and cohesiveness to the building department and zoning enforcement. I guess that's about all I can say. Oops.
Greg, do you have any follow-up?
No, but we've, my first question was going into zone enforcement, so we've kind of killed that first one. But yeah, I don't.
Dylan, do you have any follow-up?
No.
All right. Kenan, do you have any follow-up?
No, not right now.
Nancy, do you have any follow-up?
Oh, thank you.
Okay. So, Greg, do you want to ask your question or modify your question a little bit to see if Bill can expand upon what he's already mentioned?
Right. Absolutely. Basically, my question was as to your experience working with enforcing zoning bylaws. So you said you work with zone enforcement. What have you done in steps to enforce zoning bylaws, and what types of circumstances have you come across?
Well, it seems every day I have to enforce some type of zoning, if basically through a discussion of clarification of the zoning. For instance, today in Wales, there's a proposed storage facility on the border of Wales and Brimfield. The Wales has a very small zoning pamphlet, I should say. But one of the zoning issues was or is no more than one principal structure on a lot. And of course, these storage facilities have 3-4 buildings. This one is proposing 2. So there's a lot of question on who is enforcing that zoning. And basically, I just set down the law because nobody had before in the past that it has to go before the zoning board for a variance on that before it can be okayed in the building department. So the planning board was under the assumption that they could just go over the zoning, and I asked them to show me where they have that authority, and they haven't come up with that yet. So that's just one example of zoning. I mean, I've done so much with the solar fields, the particular one in Brimfield, where they put the field in, it was operating for a couple of years, and they decided on their own accord to put in more fields for research and development. My fire inspector notified me. I went up there and threatened, well, I did put a cease and desist on their operation. And then we had to go through the whole process of them applying for a permit, going before the planning board and making sure that they weren't infringing on the Chapter 61 land that they had taken out of Chapter 61. We thought they had separate parcels, and I was under the impression they may have encroached on that, but they didn't in the long run. But so that's one thing. And then just basically following the zoning, it's a very difficult thing to understand all of it at once. You have to sit down and go through it line by line on each section that pertains to whatever is being offered at the time or proposed at the time. So, I mean, I could list a lot more of them, but I'd have to actually go through my files to tell you exactly how many or what they are. But zoning happens every day.
No, that covers it. The intent was to make sure that people understand, you understand we're talking about zoning, what type of enforcement is required in the office. That's all. Very good.
I do understand what's the enforcement. I haven't had to go through the process of serious enforcement. Almost always a discussion with the applicant or the opposing party is enough to bring it to put the issue to sleep, I guess.
Yeah,
I haven't had to actually go to court on anything yet. So
rarely does it go further than that, I think.
yeah, and that's the way I'd like it to.
Very good.
All right, I have one follow-up on that. As a select board member, invariably we get complaints. Someone will say, why is someone doing this over here? And what is the building commissioner doing about it?
Correct.
Understanding, especially in this role for towns, how would you identify your approach in recognizing if somebody's doing something that they don't have a permit for and personally proactively calling it out versus waiting for someone to bring it to your attention and then addressing it? And the reason I bring that up is it presents kind of a perception issue here. Is, are you picking and choosing who you beat up on because you see it because it happens to be on the road you drive by every day? Or are you waiting for people to use official channels to say, hey, I noticed my neighbor's doing this, and now you're responding to an actual request from the general public? I'm just curious how you...
Yep. Well, I've set up in both towns a complaint form. And the reason for that is because a lot of time neighborly disputes will have one of the neighbors try to use the town and the building department and zoning official as a tool to solve their complaints with each other, as opposed to because they're actually doing something wrong. So anyone that wants to file a complaint has to realize that it's a public record. They have to also identify themselves and prove that they are actually, this is actually something that affects them. And then they have to cite the zoning or the code that they feel is being breached. That just takes out a lot of the complaints that come to the office because people realize that they can't just use the town as a tool in their disputes. Once I received that, and to tell you the truth, I've only received one in the 2 years that I've been here because, and then once I received them, I researched them. That doesn't mean that I don't go out and look at them anyways. I usually do because I want to make sure that there's something not terribly going wrong. But I won't do anything official until I have an official complaint. I just find that that's the official way, that there is a better way of doing it to stem the abuse of the system.
All right, thank you. Dylan, do you have any questions? Follow up.
Well, I'd say I've got a question that's on the same lines as these previous couple of questions, as to Bill, your key to success when communicating with the public. What might that be? And
Dylan.
Yeah,
I may have not quite said it right. I didn't mean what's your next question to ask. I mean, did you have a follow-up on Greg's original question? All right. Go ahead, Dylan.
Oh, I do not have a follow-up, no.
Oh, all right. Sorry. Thank you. Greg, did you have a follow-up to the response on my question?
No, I'm just looking at our time thinking we better speed this up. I bet we'll be here for 2 hours.
It's difficult with this, making sure everybody has a chance to speak. But Kenan, do you have anything?
No, I'm good.
Nancy?
I'm good, Matt. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Dylan, go ahead. Back to your question.
Bill, what would you say is your key to success with communicating with the public? And I'll just merge a couple questions. Could you share an experience you've had in dealing with a difficult person and how you handled that situation?
Okay. I think I deal with it what I do in any respect is I reach out to the person and find out where they're coming from and why they think they can be doing what they're doing. Generally, for instance, if someone decides to just put a garage up without coming to the town for a permit, first of all, I I do research on their lot and what's allowed, and if they are breaking more than just the building code, if they're breaking the zoning also, then I reach out to the person and find out who they are. If they are the homeowner, I'm not as strict about my response. I will say that they need to stop, and I'll put a cease and desist. And they need to come to my office, and we need to hash through the permit process. If they're a contractor, that's a whole different story. They're going to stop immediately, and they're going to also come down to my office, and we're going to go through everything that they've done and everything that they're going to do, and they're going to pay the double fee. I strive to make sure that they are actually paying the double fee and not the homeowner. I haven't had a situation where I haven't been able to come to some agreement with anyone. I haven't done any headbutting at all in Wales and Brimfield to the point where we weren't able to agree. I think I'm able to discuss it out and then come to an agreement. As long as it meets the code, then that's fine. I'm willing to extend time frames and such to get to that point. But I can't say that about Southbridge, because that was a whole different situation. I had plenty of headbutts there because I was dealing with more landlord tenant owners than I was homeowners or contractors. I just feel that communication is key, and to know what the code is. So.
Excellent. Thank you.
Greg, do you have any follow-up?
Nope.
Kenan?
No.
Nancy?
No.
Me either. All right, we'll move on to my next question. The Regional Building Commissioner will report directly to the Barre Board of Selectmen and will be responsible to check in with each community to ensure that they are meeting all objectives. In addition, the Building Commissioner will routinely work with the planning boards of the various towns. Please explain your experience working with an elected board.
Well, I can only speak to the last couple of years, and I've gone through a couple of solar fields, the storage facility that I spoke to earlier. There hasn't been a whole lot of stuff coming across in either of the towns that I can say that I was actively involved in outside of those. I mean, there was a safety complex in Brimfield but that was already in progress before I started. So I came on just as they were putting up the walls. So almost all of that was already hashed out. But I mean, it's just like anything. You have to attend the meetings, talk with the people, and listen to everybody's concerns, and come up with making things work according to the codes and the zoning.
Okay. I have a follow-up on that briefly, and it's an example, but I want to, before I potentially go down a different track, Greg, did you have anything to follow up on what he just said?
No.
Dylan, did you have anything?
Negative.
I'll get back to you, Kenan and Nancy, in just a sec. I just want to throw out an example where coordinating with elected boards and the building commissioner, and then the third point in the triangle, the actual permit holder or applicant. If the planning board of any of these towns issues a special permit, for instance, in our town, solar requires special permit. When a contractor starts to deviate from the approved drawings, at what point do you believe it's time to go back to the planning board to find out if they deem that deviation requires additional special permit approval by the planning board?
That's a pretty broad question. I would say that the planning board has stipulations as you know, that I guess the time to take care of it is as soon as it comes to my knowledge, and that's usually the way I handle things. I make a phone call. Now, it depends on what the item that they're not following is. And if it's a gross negligence or just, whatever, however you want to describe it, I would put a cease and desist on the whole project. That usually gets people's attention. And at that point, we discuss what they're doing, why they're doing it. And then if it's a change in the plan, if it affects planning or if it's a code or a zoning violation, they have to go and either amend their original plan or go back to the board that pertains to whatever it is they didn't follow. So it's basically stop. Let's make sure that you're doing it right, and then you can continue.
Thank you. Kenan, do you have any follow-up on the general discussion we just had?
No, I'm fine with that.
Nancy?
I'm all set.
Thank you. Greg, you have the floor for your next question.
Thank you. You probably realize that being the commission, you got to be overseeing the electrical and plumbing inspectors in each of these 4 towns. What kind of experience do you have with that kind of management position with these other inspectors?
Well, I guess I'm lucky. I have excellent electrical. Actually, my electrical inspector in Brimfield and Wales is the same person. He's also a teacher up in Tantascwa, and he has a few other towns in the area too. Scott Mansfield. He's excellent. He's been doing it for 25 years. He helps me out a lot, and I help him out a lot. I don't know my plumbing inspector in Brimfield that well because the plumbing department, for some reason, is underneath the health department. So although I've talked base with him a few times, actually, I think he might be the plumbing inspector in one of your towns. Kent, I think his name is. But anyways, as he's not underneath me, so I have very little to talk with him. The only communication I need with him is if he's finished his rough or final inspections on residents. And then my plumbing inspector in Wales, Rick Buccelli, is also excellent. Does a great job. Shows up when he's supposed to. Does his work. I don't get involved in their inspections unless I get complaints that they're not showing up. And the only time that's happened is when we had a computer malfunction in Brimfield, and for a couple of weeks things weren't getting to Scott. As soon as I get a call that somebody is not getting a response from either one of the employees, I call them right away. I call the inspector right away, and they usually generally take care of it right away. So I have great relationships with all of them. So no, outside of Ed, I don't think. I've only spoken to him a couple of times.
Okay.
I have nothing more. Do you have any more, Dylan?
I do not, no.
You good, Greg?
Yes.
Kenan?
My concern with the last one was follow-up and accountability.
In respect to
I want to make sure we get that out of this time around.
I'm not sure what your question is.
Well, I want to make sure we get good follow-up because I had more people in town complain that they didn't get return calls nor inspections. And we could never get a true accountability of what she did every day.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I thought we were talking about electrical and plumbing inspectors still.
Nope.
No, so we're talking about the building official and zoning. Well, I'm accountable at all times. The website in both towns has my cell phone number listed. People call me at all times. I don't necessarily answer after normal business hours, but a lot of the times I do. I spend a lot of time on the computer writing emails at night and getting things set for the next day. I don't like letting things wait. I was on the other side of the table for long enough to know that when you've got a contract you're waiting on and you need approval or inspections, that to sit around and wait for an inspector that doesn't show up or contact you is one of the worst things that can happen because you don't know whether you can go forward or not. The state of Massachusetts gives me and any inspector 48 hours from notification to make the inspection. A lot of people probably don't realize that once that 48 hours is up, they have the ability to just document their work and move on. I haven't had to have anyone go past the 48 hours. I'm always available. The towns that I work in now, I was a contractor for years. The previous inspector, or one of the previous inspectors in the towns, never showed up for any inspections. And that drove me nuts as a contractor. And I have sworn myself to not be that guy. I'm available. Just call me. I'll make an appointment. Everybody now seems to be saying, oh, you can come tomorrow? And I go, yeah, I'll be there tomorrow. That's not to say that I'm going to be able to do that when I'm covering 4 towns, but I will at least make the contact and set a schedule to come. So I don't think that's going to be an issue with me.
Okay, and we can expand upon that further in the interview, Kenan.
All right, that's fine.
Nancy, do you have any?
No, I'm all set, Matt. Thank you.
Okay. Dylan, you have the floor for your next question.
Sure. As a department head, you'll be responsible for managing the department's budget. And what is your experience working with municipal budgets?
Well, it's not a lot involved in the building and zoning department budget. I don't believe. I mean, I haven't found it to be that difficult. Outside of the commissioner's salary and the administrative assistant's salary, if there's one, it's expenses. Expenses are just whatever the office needs. If it needs a new printer, if it needs a computer, well, there would be an expense that probably I'd have to go to the purchasing board first or whatever. I'm not even sure. Every town has different rules in how they do it. So, I mean, it's just day-to-day office expenses is about the only thing that's really a major concern. So other than that, it's very, very basic and very simple. Both my towns, I usually turn back money the last couple of years. I turn back money at the end of the year. So.
Do you have a follow-up on that, Greg?
No, I don't.
Okay. I only have one follow-up just because we do have the 4-town regional. Primarily from our perspective, we would probably be requesting you to show up with the finance committee and kind of justify your request in your budget. It's kind of an annual process we do with each department head. But this question may not be directly for you, Bill, but get a little feedback from Kenan and Nancy. My guess is even though Barre is hiring you, you are doing a similar service for the other 3 towns in the agreement. What type of role do you, Kenan, think that you might ask of Bill in providing any update on what your office or your building department expenses or similar may need? Like, are you just like is it a simple just, hey, I got a couple questions, he gives you a couple answers and you incorporate it yourself? Or would you be looking for him to participate a little bit more in talking to your finance committee?
No, to be honest with you, you guys kind of reach out to us and tell us what we're going to be assessed.
I just didn't know if you need input for like your own office support. If I understand, each town kind of has their own little office or desk for Bill.
Well, he has an office in our town, but my question is, who's doing the paperwork? Because we didn't get ours done real well.
That would be something that I do believe the building commissioner would still have his primary role, and whatever assistant that may be part of your office, and I'm not saying you do or don't.
We don't.
The combination, so this would be a little bit of Bill's management of the resources that each town provides that are outside of Barre's committed resources. And balancing that between what he has to do versus what your own assistant might be doing to help fill in the gap when it comes to filling out paperwork. Ultimately, he has to own it, but he would have to work with managing it.
We don't have the staff to do that right now.
Do you have any full-time personnel in your town hall?
Well, we got a town administrator. We have a town clerk, but we don't have anyone helping any of them at this point. We got rid of our assistant to the administrator because we couldn't afford it.
Bill might have more suggestions, but I would think maybe at least for applications, people could go to your administrator to take out an application and fill it out.
Well, all the applications are right there at the door. So we keep those right out there. But I had understood that we were going to go online at some point and do the applications that way.
As in all 4 towns getting on a similar system or the same system?
I would think so.
Okay, that's something that in the agreement we can continue to discuss, and
May I make
at
a
that
suggestion?
point, we'll have Bill's input.
Please, Bill.
Okay. Well, in Brimfield, we have an online permit system called Permit Pro. You guys could go on there and just look at it yourselves. You can see what's involved in it. As a guest, I believe you can go through the permits that are applied for and the different stages that they're in. I would strongly suggest that the 4 towns look at this type of a situation and then get together and figure out one administrative assistant, I'm sure would be enough to cover all 4 towns, as long as traveling to each town to file the paperwork would not be required. I don't really know how you guys have it set up or how it is right now, but to have running 4 separate offices seems to be kind of, I don't know, overburdened. I understand that each town needs to have their own records in their own town hall, I guess, but to have somebody traveling from office to office to office to office to do paperwork seems to be a pretty big waste. Today, especially with the COVID thing, almost everything is now done over the internet. I've only accepted 1 physical permit since for the last 2 months, I'd say, maybe 2. The rest of them all been presented to me, by person. The others have all been presented either by mail, drop off, or over the internet. It's something that you guys should look into, and it would make things easier for everyone. It also ties in the tax collectors and the assessor's office so that they can sign off on any permit that is proposed. And then the GIS mapping is also part of it. But again, I don't know what each of your town has, and from there. But it would be a good challenge to try to bring all 4 towns into one system and get it operating correctly. So,
Okay. Nancy, do you have anything you want to add into the discussion?
Sure. So on the first part of it, which was kind of the budget focus that Matt was talking about and how Barre does your budget, sounds very similar to Petersham, where the department head is invited in to review their budget. It's a mix of, we need to know if it's a near flat budget or flat or below. It's more of a courtesy so that everyone knows they can always come in and see each other and everybody discuss issues. So that's always welcome. It got modified a little bit because of the regional agreement in a helpful way, where we all had pretty much budgets in advance well enough, and the budgets weren't changing that much, that the last 2 years or so, perhaps the prior building inspector did not need to come in and see us. So we are open on that going forward for whatever really the new building inspector's preference is for budget review. So I guess that would be kind of filed under, see how that goes on budget. The second part that Bill just brought up a bit because of Kenan's thoughts, that all sounds very interesting. We definitely all are working in our 4-town methods right now, Bill, where I think at least 3 of us, I believe, have assistants to the building inspector. And just, it sounds like Hardwick had to lose theirs. We'd be open to trying another way if the new building inspector was open to working on that with us. we have forms available online through the computer, but we do not process a lot of stuff through digital systems. But, if it works, we would be interested.
Okay.
So, to summarize that, Matt and Bill, I think it's if it's something Bill's familiar with and advises and recommends, perhaps all 4 towns would be, I would hope we'd all at least consider it.
No, that sounds good. And I guess one last comment, but then we'll get right into the next question, because we could go on forever about the regional agreement itself. Is that will be something you're involved in, Bill, is if we hire you, you will be working with us to identify inefficient systems that we can maybe make better in other ways, coordinating with each town and kind of bringing, at times, it may be a request of the Board of Selectmen or the town administrator for you to do a little, reach out to each town, get some input, come back. At times we'll do it and then ask for your input. And so it always ends up being a joint team venture here with this agreement. And I think it's been good when it comes to the towns trying to communicate and work together. So I don't think there's a big problem with the agreement in that regard, but we do know there's room for improvement. I think anybody that looks at any process or procedure or agreement and doesn't assume there's some room for improvement is potentially lying to themselves. Other than that, though, I'm just going to go to the next question because, as Greg mentioned, we could be here all day. The building commissioner splits the time in each of the communities dealing with different zoning laws, different boards, different employees, different residents. This would require the next building commissioner to be able to switch gears and keep track of multiple projects in multiple towns. Each community is set up differently, and in some there is an administrative assistant, as we just discussed. Can you please share what experience, never mind. I'm going to the next question because that pretty much is everything we just talked about. New start. Okay. Tell me how you organize, plan, and prioritize your work.
Well, we could be here for an hour discussing that. When I started in Southbridge, they handed me a list of 3 families to inspect once every 5 years and set me free. So I set up everything. Started with spreadsheets. I made my own spreadsheets. I divided the town into 5 sections so that it would roll over once every year. A new section would be inspected, and so that at the end of the 5 years, on the 6th year, the first year would start again. I was halfway through my 2nd year when I left. I had everything set up. Everything was in files. So that a person that understands filing it all would be able to come in and just take over. When I went into Wales, it had been seriously ignored for years. The inspector that was there had probably not made any inspections. He had been accepting applications and never filing anything, not even turning the checks over to the treasurer. I had to go in there and pretty much gut the office and take it all apart and put it back together. I had to track down 18 months of past permits that had no fees turned into the town and collect those, which I got probably about an 80% response. As I said, I gutted the office and put it back together. And then I started in on the boxes of files that were stuffed in the office from as far back as the 80s. I was on my own there for a while, and then they hired an assistant, and she's been awesome. She only works 3 hours a week. She comes in, I got her hours bumped up to 6 hours a week, and together we have slowly gone through boxes and boxes and old filing cabinets of files and whittled them all down and got everything filed by the address that they pertain to. So in the Brimfield office, it was pretty much set up pretty much correctly. I didn't have to do any real changing there, and I had a good assistant that was there 12 hours a week. So she has since moved on to a full-time position in another town, and that has forced me to learn their system because every town has its own. So I've been running the office myself now for about a month and a half, and that has forced me to learn the system inside and out. It's a good system. It uses the Permit Pro. It helps out a lot as far as all the filing goes. But I also, everything that comes across the computer, I also make copies of because I don't absolutely trust the cloud to hold on to everything. So everything has a paper copy in the file by address. I have yet to go through, they have quite a few open permits that are 2 or 3 years old that are just sitting there. And once I get my new assistant, which is going to be soon, one of her main tasks is to start in, I think, 2017 and just go through every single one that's open and find a determination on what's going on with it. A lot of people have learned that if they don't get an OC, the taxes don't get knocked up yet because the assessor hasn't been notified that they're living in it. So right now I'm in the process of bringing 3 or 4 properties into compliance in that respect. They've been living in the house without an OC. So I'm in the process of bringing them on board now. So I guess that kind of answers the question.
Heather, please remove Amelia from this group meeting. Okay, am I ready for my next question?
Sure.
Trying to keep it going. Of the 3 questions I'm supposed to have left, I think 2 are not really relevant. One's been covered, one I don't really has a bearing, but I think the final one is pretty important. Obviously, as a commissioner and our local inspectors, we have natural disasters, car accidents, and many things, and fires that impact homes and structures during all hours of the night. Now, are you going to be available to come inspect those things when it's necessary, particularly in fires for structural integrity? And we do have vehicles in the building sometimes. We got to make a determination if people can stay occupied in the building or what they're going to need to do.
Yeah, well, I'm available in the towns that I work in now, and there's no reason why that would change up there. I understand that things that happen in the middle of the night, will change my sleeping habits, but that's just the way it is. It's part of the job. I get calls from the fire department that says the house has been on fire, and I need to determine if it's livable or not. I'm in my car as soon as possible, and I'm on my way. So that's just the way it is.
Very good.
Any follow-up, Dylan?
Nope.
Kenan?
Nope.
Nancy?
Nope.
Okay. Dylan?
Yeah, most of my questions have been pretty much covered, except for my last one, which is just if we were to offer you the position, when would you be able to start?
Well, I would say June 1st would be a good start date.
Matt, your mic's not on.
Last question from me. As a host community for this program, the town of Barre is responsible for making sure that we manage and track all costs, including the building commissioner's hours and how they are split amongst the different communities. Please provide an example of how you have managed and tracked your time for project or work in the past.
Well, I've never had to outside of Southbridge. There is no, outside of a few set hours prior to the COVID-19, there was a 4-hour set time in Brimfield and a 2-hour set time in Wales. I was there. I never missed a day. How would I separate I have no idea of how I would separate the 4 communities up there. I don't know the demographics or the sizes of the community or the amount of work that's required in each. All I can say is that I'm a worker. I get the job done, and I don't know what else I can say about it. I don't slack off. I go and do what's needed to be done. So,
Okay. Quick clarification of the question is, and this is more in relation to how our regional agreement is set up. Not so much how you plan hours, such as like office hours in each time, et cetera, but how do you actually track the hours? Because originally we based the kind of the assessment of each town based on an estimated number of hours per week.
yeah. Well, not knowing how that is, I don't know. The only way that I'm able to track what I do is I have a spreadsheet set up in Brimfield for and Wales for the inspections I make. And I do that for the mileage. So the spreadsheet says that when the request was sent in, who the homeowner, the property address, the homeowner, the contractor, phone numbers, and then what the permit is for, the permit number, and then what the inspection is for. And then the mileage. And that's about the only way that I have that I track what I do. Other than that, I don't have to answer to anybody. Nobody gets any complaints. So they haven't made me do anything else. So.
Okay. I have nothing to follow up, but I do want to give Greg, do you have a follow-up?
I do not. I hate to keep him on here this long. I didn't think we planned this long of a meeting on him. I'm glad we got to meet him, and I hope everyone is satisfied with the answers we have so far, so we can move to our deliberations about this.
Dylan, any follow-up?
Oh, I'll just put a ditto on what Greg just said.
Kenan, do you have any follow-up?
I'm good.
Nancy?
I know I'm sensitive to the time, but I just want to make sure, just a little clarity on that last question, Bill.
Sure.
I think all 4 towns currently have set hours where the commissioner is in office, typically doing probably whatever catch-up paperwork, meeting with their assistant, and if someone walks in, to see them. So that's worked well in Petersham. We have all of 1 hour, once a week for an hour. So I guess the question is, assuming we all want to continue that, and I think, well, again, for Petersham, we can probably be pretty flexible on that time frame. The current one is, I think, 5 to 6 p.m. or 6 to 7. And that doesn't even necessarily work best for the contractors, but we would work all that out. So I want clarity that we all would still be doing that, and you would have some kind of office hours at the towns. That you understand that's how our current system
Sure.
is.
Well, in today's environment, that cannot be done. And the town offices that I've been working in are shut down.
Oh, yes.
But the department has not shut down at all. I accept all applications, and I've kept every appointment inspection by appointment. I don't see how that would be any different up in your area. Sitting in an office for an hour waiting for people to show up is something I've been doing in Wales, and I'm going to let them know that I won't be doing that anymore. It's a waste of my time to sit there and then have nobody even call. So I'm available by cell phone anytime, and I don't shirk my duties. If someone calls me, I respond, and I go to whatever is required. I'm not sure of all the filing that we're talking about. If I'm going to be responsible for filing, well, that's something that is a waste of my time as a commissioner. I don't own the papers or the filings. The paperwork belongs to the towns individually, and I am just a purveyor of them at the present time. And that's why I feel the towns should be responsible for their own filing. If that falls on my shoulders, well, I don't think that's the best use of my time. I think you might want to consider a administrative assistant that takes care of all 4 towns. I think it could be done in a central location, and then the paperwork could be brought back to the individual towns on a once-a-week basis. As far as sitting in the office waiting for people to show up, it's not something I'm looking forward to doing. If it's a requirement, I'll do it. But I think that communication, a phone call, and an appointment made is a better use of my time and of the people that, if they call me up and they want to ask about a permit, I'll say, okay, meet me there at 10 o'clock in the morning and we'll go through the process. But to just sit there and hope people show up, kind of a waste of my time.
Yeah.
But
Well,
again, I do not know the volume that you guys have. So,
right.
I don't know.
So, thank you. We can certainly double check either individual or all 4 towns. If that has not been a wise use of the inspector's time, then yes, we do not want to repeat something that is unnecessary. I've never heard that it was underutilized in Petersham, but maybe I wasn't hearing everything. So we'll see. So we'll just see where that all lands.
I'd just point out that we do have a set minimum but set minimum hours that we expect to be put in by the inspector. And that's allocated right now by town, so many hours per town. And, I would think personally in Barre, we would expect a certain amount of office hours where there's a known time. It may not mean that you're waiting for phone calls. Maybe that's when you file paperwork. Maybe that's when you catch up on some phone calls, whatever you got to do in the office to keep you busy. But I would expect that most citizens expect to be at least have the ability to get face to face when offices are open with the inspector commissioner to ask a simple question rather than try to do it over the phone, or maybe show you a drawing and ask a question. I mean, I think to have still in our small towns to have that availability is important to people. And I think if we don't offer that, we're going to have some upset citizenry. Obviously, contractors in general, we're not too worried about who we talk to in the office. We want it signed off on. But I think there's still a good portion of permits that are done by homeowners. And although I don't know where you stand in this, some commissioners are very much against homeowners doing any of their own work. And they just tell them, nope, doesn't pass inspection, figure out why, and they're tough on it. And I prefer to see a commissioner. I mean, as much as I think when homeowners do their own work, it often ends up very poorly done. I'd rather have a commissioner that would take a minute and explain it to them. And maybe when they understand the task, they'll hire somebody. But
I've had that situation many times.
Yeah.
Let me try to explain myself a little bit better. Everyone has the ability to meet with me at any time. Today's technology has improved so much in this type of work, whereas sitting down in an office at a specific time during the week was required and needed. I am a phone call away from anybody by just calling in, asking me what's a good time to get together so that I can talk to you about the permit process. Almost everything can be discussed on the phone. But that's up to the individual towns and how they really want to run their offices. Do they want to have a person sitting in their office at a specific time during the week, every week? That's up to you guys. Will have to decide that. I don't think it's necessary. To answer your question or your concern about a homeowner pulling permits, the state of Massachusetts says that a homeowner can pull their own permit for work that they do in their own home. And when someone comes to me with that, I try to find out their expertise and what their level of pain is. I strongly suggest a lot that they get a construction supervisor. A lot of times I get flippers coming in and saying that they're the homeowner. And I have to point out to them that they're not a homeowner. They're a property owner, a huge difference. A lot of times people with a second home want to come in and do work on their second home. And I have to point out to them that it is not their principal dwelling. They cannot do that work on their own. They have to have a construction supervisor. There's reasons for that. I don't have the time to instruct homeowners the correct way to attach a 2x4. They either know that or they don't. And if they don't, then I'm not going to stand back and tell them, well, you need to put more nails in there. They should know that, or they should get somebody that knows that. And that's usually the way I leave it with them. Most times, most of the ones that I suspect are going to have a problem find somebody to help them. So I haven't run into a situation where I have to not accept or not pass an inspection because the homeowner did the work. We've always figured it out.
Okay. Lastly, Bill, what questions do you have for us?
Well, I don't know anything about the way it's set up. I mean, all I know is that there's 4 towns and 1 commissioner that covers all 4. I don't know what the offer really is. There was an amount put out there, but that's not even my focus, really. My focus is to a job description and a division of time and the expectations that each town has so that I can follow them and then make adjustments as required. I don't know how it's set up. Is it, set amount of, I mean, I'm based in Barre, I guess, and then I go from there to the different 3 other towns. So my only questions are the nuts and bolts of the job as far as that goes. During the job, I feel there's absolutely no issues whatsoever. I love the area. I think I'd be a great asset to every one of the communities.
Okay, I'll start with a little bit of response to your question there. The regional agreement is based on an estimated number of hours per town. That doesn't mean you are required to provide that number of hours to each town. The agreement is for you to provide the necessary services of a building commissioner for each town, and then prioritize your time to make sure that happens. So if for some reason we estimate New Braintree, you're only doing 2 hours a week, but they just happen to have a random building project pop up, and now you're putting in about 6 months of 4 hours a week. You threw off the assessment, but that doesn't matter because the intent is at the end of the year, and this is why we're asking you about tracking hours. All 4 towns revisit the actual hours you spent that year, and we discuss how we modify the assessments for towns. But the idea really isn't you spend 2 hours in New Braintree, 4 hours in Hardwick, 4 hours in Petersham, and the rest in Barre, or however we broke that out. It's you've got to be the building commissioner and do what's necessary for all 4 towns.
Got it.
And then you have certain towns use different other inspectors for electrical and plumbing. So you'll develop that relationship and coordinate that. Part of the basis was the electrical permits and plumbing permits were revenues that those towns maintained and expenses they paid to those inspectors outside of us. So Barre does not pay Hardwick's electrical inspector or plumbing inspector.
Right.
And so that's part of the reason all 4 towns have different inspectors.
Mm-hmm.
It was just easier, I believe, administratively and payroll and everything else to keep it that way. And as you said, you just got to know the phone number. You call the person,
Right.
say, where you at? And then it's a coordination more than a management at that
Right.
level. The paperwork, permitting, the discussions were brought about of how much time spent in an office to make sure files are appropriately filed for that town. It still falls under your responsibility or accountability to make sure it happens.
And discretion.
Correct. But what you're going to get is ultimately direction comes from us as to what you have to do in each town. But we start with the idea of work with that town administration. And as long as it's working, we're not worried about what they're asking of you, and you're not worried about what they're asking of you. But if there is an issue where one town technically is asking something of you that think is overbearing, what you do is you bring it back to us, the Board of Selectmen, town administrator, and then we reach back out to that town and see if we can help bridge the gap to figure out why they're asking for something and why you think you don't need to do it and how to fill in that gap. So we're never asking you to be the person to get stuck between the towns. You just need to communicate with us so the towns can work together and you don't feel like you're being leveraged against one another, because that's not what this position was about. And it's not how a regional agreement works. It works by just letting everybody know, and then we all come together and say, how do we make this work? I don't know if that helps you any, but that's generally the concept of this regional commissioner. Did that answer some of your questions?
Yeah, I guess, is there an administrative assistant involved in?
Okay, the town of Barre we have a full-time assistant that is pretty much 50-50 supporting the building department and supporting the Board of Health.
Okay,
So you get a good 20 hours from our assistant. I think Kenan already mentioned you no longer have an assistant in Hardwick at the moment, but you may be able to work with Hardwick to see if there's somebody in town that can fill in a certain amount of support depending on the type of support needed. It may just be once a week, could you go to this program if they have one and just print it all out so it can be properly filed? I'm not sure. So I'm just saying that, again, I don't know the nuts and bolts of the daily operations of the building commissioner in Hardwick and the amount of commitment necessary at the moment. That will be something you're going to have to learn, and that will be part of the continual improvement we talked about very early in this regarding the regional agreement. And that was just an example. Each town kind of has their own little thing. I think Nancy mentioned that they have somebody that can kind of assist because they do have someone. I don't know what New Braintree's like. I think they had someone, but again, they may have done something similar to Hardwick and recently had to let them go.
I've been running without an assistant, and I've run without an assistant in both the small communities that I've in now, and I've been able to take care of most of the work. But it does get overbearing when you're trying to do code enforcement and research, and then trying to file paperwork at the same time and field phone calls. So I think you need somebody can concentrate on the filing part and not have to stop and grab a code book or a zoning book to answer a question when somebody just shows up in the office. However it works out, I'm sure that I can make it work. However it is set up right now, I'm sure that I can find the ways to improve it, and make it so that each town feels that they're being covered. I look at it as it's just one town pretty much, and then it's just each area requires a different level of attention, and it's going to change. It's just fluid thing. It's a challenge, and I think I'd be up to it.
Close off the dashboard so I can change.
All right, just one last thing I'll say, and then I'm going to let each person have their own kind of follow-up on that. But in regards to this regional agreement, I would suggest that Barre is kind of going to end up being your largest burden of work.
Yep.
It was kind of how we ended up being the center point, because the other three towns didn't necessarily need a full-time building commissioner. And so it kind of just worked out between the whole concept. And at the time we created the agreement, there were other things in play. So I don't want to assume it was just one reason. But because of that, you also have, like I said, a very competent person who's been in Barre even before the last commissioner.
Great.
So when it comes to your support with filing and all that, I would say you will come into an office where you are working with some people that you're not going to have to probably reteach some of those things you would look for. So for that reason, I just wanted to put that out there. But what I would like to start with now is just go through one last round of any other questions for Bill or response to Bill. Greg, do you have anything you want to add?
I don't, but I'm going to be bowing out of here within the next 2 minutes because I have another appointment I'm going to be late for.
Okay. Dylan.
No further questions. Thank you, Bill.
Kenan.
No further questions.
Nancy.
No further questions. Thank you, Bill.
Okay, what I would like to do is see if we can still get at least a minute or so of Greg before he bows out. I would like to ask Bill that you leave, and Heather will
Okay.
follow up with you.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Bill.
All right.
All good.
All right, Greg, since you got to leave first, I give you the floor to bring up anything you want to talk about this applicant.
I've got no concerns. Like I said, he's, reminds me of me. He's a guy that's been doing constructions. It sounds like he does carpentry, and a natural progression is to, stop lugging heavy materials and pounding nails and to stay with it. You get into the inspection side, and he seems like a knowledgeable guy. I like his answers, and I like him.
Dylan. Oh, I'm sorry. Are you done, Greg? Or?
I'm done. Yep.
Okay, Dylan.
Yeah, similar. His resume is long. He seems like he's got a lot of experience. I like him. He seems like he'll be flexible and is more than ready, willing, and able to do the job that we're asking.
Okay. Kenan, your thoughts?
My concern is his attitude with the office hours, but we'll see.
Gotcha. Nancy.
I liked him also. Definitely good, very good impression. Definitely experienced. I think some of the things like the office hour issue, some of that we can get through. He clearly has the experience on the professional side that we can figure out how to get the four towns working with him. That part does not concern me per se. So I liked him a lot.
All right. I think he would be good. I do think that office hours may or may not be an issue, but it came across like it's not so much that he's not willing to give the time. He just doesn't want to be locked into a certain location for a certain amount of time just because. It sounded like he might be, if you want to talk to him, you call him, he'll come find you or meet you somewhere and talk to you if you're not a phone person or a computer person. I'm hoping that feeling I got is accurate. Otherwise, I'm pretty comfortable with what he offers. Time will tell. No matter who you hire, you really don't know until you live it. One last thing, Kenan, if the Board of Selectmen wanted to move forward with this, would that be something you would be concerned with?
No.
Okay. And I just wanted to reiterate, the whole process here will only work if the towns continue to communicate and express your concerns to each other so that we can all try to resolve anything that comes up.
I actually was looking to get out of the agreement with the last one.
I know New Braintree wanted to also almost. Other than the financials, they would have jumped ship probably a year and a half ago.
Yep.
Nancy.
Sorry, I just lost track of how you were trying to phrase that question, Matt.
Oh, the question is, as a representative of Petersham, if the Barre Select Board chose this individual as the new hire, would that be a problem for you?
No, I think the Select Board would be pleased. And we would support that effort if that's where we're headed. You're starting to try and determine that. And I do believe the office hours, even if we all modify, particularly for the three small towns, Matt, because you all are going to see him in some kind of concrete way. And even if it's twice a month or something to get it going with us, it might not be weekly. And of course, with COVID, everything's a little different. We work out perhaps a modified plan. I think we'd probably be fine with that in Petersham. And I guess I'd ask the three small towns to go back to their staff. So we'd go back to the assistant here and try and get an honest answer of how helpful or necessary or not was it to have him in or have the prior inspector in for 1 hour a week. If it's not needed, we certainly don't want to repeat it. But if our assistant says it was really helpful and needed, we would want to review that with the new inspector and come up with some modified plan at least, probably. But I think he'd be open to that, right? I mean,
I think so. I really think, again, we were asking questions where we couldn't provide him the details of how the daily operations really were working. I think once he starts living it, he came across as someone that would use reasonable judgment and focus his time and energy in the right place at the right time.
Yeah. None of us want him sitting somewhere where he's twiddling his thumb. So that's a given. We wouldn't let that happen.
Okay. Alrighty then. What I would like then is there's a couple things, and I'll follow up with our board so I'm not necessarily speaking for everybody because Greg did have to drop out. I am going to recommend that our board at our next meeting revisit and probably propose a vote to either hire or not hire, but at least put it on the agenda for that.
Yep.
Also, I would ask that you reach out to your board and building department, Nancy, as well as you, Kenan, for anybody that works with or relates to, and get some of that feedback that Nancy just talked about. Because what I would like to do is set up a meeting of all 4 towns again, probably in a month or so, or 2 months, depending on the type of meeting we want, whether it's face-to-face or Zoom, and try to get us all to really work through some of these things that we know that over the last year and a half, 2 years has been a little unfulfilling for some, and get that fixed and get us back on the same track. So this continues to be a positive agreement for all 4 towns.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right.
With that, so that sounded good for going forward, Matt. And prior to that 1 or 2 month period, it sounds like the idea is if there's a positive vote out of Barre and what you're hearing from myself and Kenan, and maybe Heather needs to put a call into New Braintree and try and do some kind, or you, Matt, some kind of verbal with them, that you would, if it's a positive vote, be proceeding to making an offer to Bill. Is that what you were indicating?
Yeah, and I'll reach out to the chairman of the New Braintree Select Board.
Okay, good. Give them an update.
And I'll talk to him to get a feeling and explain to him at least my impression of this interview, whatever that means to their chairman. I don't mean it means much, but I will reach out to him and do the same I just asked of you, is to kind of put your thoughts together on the position, the role in the agreement, and let's get back together sooner than later and work on cleaning up so that when the new commissioner comes in, my hope is he kind of comes in and he gets to just learn how each town wants it.
Yep.
And then we actually get together and we all agree that this is how we might change some things because it works better, but we want to make sure that we have the 4 towns' inputs on that process. So I would like to have him live it almost the way we've been living it for a month or 2.
Mm-hmm.
And then get his impression on how we could be more efficient.
Yep. Agreed. I think, so I just wanted to ask, and I know Heather's still there, if there's a vote to proceed to offer, I think Heather either has already or would call his references, and I wasn't sure if those calls had had a chance to be made yet.
So the calls have been made, Nancy. I'm just waiting on callbacks.
Oh, great.
Because of COVID-19, no one's working in the office.
Exactly.
So I did initially start talking with one person in one of the towns he's working in, and they were very excited to talk about him and had great things to say, but I could only talk to her for about 2 minutes because she had to deal with some other things. Yeah. So I'm waiting on those calls back. I mean, my recommendation for the Barre Board of Selectmen is if the board's going to wait for another day to vote on this, I would recommend setting up another meeting maybe on Thursday afternoon just to get this taken care of. My biggest concern is that if this is the candidate everyone's interested in and there's other opportunities out there for him, he may not wait. And we don't want to wait for our next select board meeting for 2 weeks to have this happen. The other thing to keep in mind too is we still have our alternate, Bob Leger, who's still doing inspections for us. We still have to address what we're paying him. We've never really tackled that. We started talking about an oversight the other day. We need to make sure we're compensating him, because even in the past where he would potentially be available for occasional inspections, he's essentially been our acting building commissioner since Brianna left at the end of March.
Right.
And the longer he is fully the acting, the more we're going to end up paying him as well. So we want to keep those things in mind.
We originally agreed on hiring him as the interim regional commissioner based on a per inspection rate.
So
I think that's what.
Go ahead, Nancy. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Heather. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, so the only conversations or only information I was privy to on this is, I believe I need to go back and double check, but I thought in the IMA, it had said something about like a $500 stipend, and that was like the most recent modification last year or so to the
Oh,
building.
no. What I'm saying is the IMA had no oversight on this. This was the Board of Selectmen finding an interim to fill the gap. So we hired Bob Legere as the interim building commissioner, and we agreed on a per inspection rate, because at the time, it did not appear that
So that was the
giving him
other.
a temporary salary was going to fit appropriately.
So that was a different individual. So at the time we had that conversation, what had happened was Bob was scheduled to go out for medical leave before COVID-19 happened, which meant he wasn't going to be able to cover for us. So we had initially started a conversation with another individual, and that's when the Board of Selectmen had voted to compensate that other individual at a certain rate. That other individual, and start that conversation with the other individual. The other individual at that point said, no, thank you. And Bob, our original alternate, said, hey, I'm back in the game because things got postponed due to COVID. So we have been working with our original alternate, who we've had for, I don't know, Nancy, I think Bob's been with us for a while.
Oh, yes. Yes, he has. Several years,
Bob's always been
many
the
years.
alternate that primarily worked in Petersham, correct?
Right. Right. He's been and another way to say it for you all is he's been the alternate since the agreement was in place.
Thank you. That's how I remember it as well.
Yeah.
So are you saying that what we offered the other person, Bob is not interested in, or because we're technically potentially talking about what are we going to do for the next 2.5, 3 weeks?
No, I guess I'm saying three things here. So the first thing I'm saying is that my understanding of how things were initially with Bob was that we would pay him $500 stipend a year to be the alternate. That was my understanding when Brianna had left. The reason we got into that other conversation based on hourly and compensation was we were looking at having to compensate someone who wasn't the original person in the agreement, because we didn't think Bob was going to be available. But Bob has not only been available, but he's been filling in a much higher capacity than we would have ever expected an alternate to fulfill for us. Usually you have an alternate who covers when the building commissioner goes out on vacation periodically, or they're out of town or something happens. You don't usually, I mean, we've been using Bob to his full capacity and actually having him do every inspection we've had come through since the end of March. So he's been putting in a substantial amount of work. So we need to figure out, is that, $500 stipend sufficient, or do we need to go back and just compensate him based on the number of hours? We have plenty in the regional budget for this because we haven't paid Brianna since the end of March. And then
Okay, I got you.
The second piece is, just to keep in mind that until we hire someone permanently, we're going to have to continue to pay and make sure we're providing Bob fair compensation for the work he will continue to be doing for us.
Have you had a chance to talk to Bob and see if he's willing to accept the same rate that we offered the other interim?
I have not. One of the reasons I haven't, we talked about this a little bit the other day. It's been a little challenging with COVID to get the oversight committee together. I wanted to make sure all of the towns were on board with that first, but we have at least Nancy and Kenan here. So if they're good with that concept, I'm happy to reach out to Bob.
Nothing against Nancy and Keegan.
It's not our call.
Thank you. Potentially choosing the person might be, but how we offer money doesn't matter. It's
Your employee.
the other towns already have their committed funding they're sending us. If we overspend, it's not on them. If we underspend, maybe we make a little money while we ride this ride. But when it comes to what we offer Bob for compensation to fill in this gap, that's really a Barre decision. But whether Bob is the right person to ask, we definitely should get Nancy and Kenan's input like we did during this interview. Ultimately our decision, but we don't want to just throw someone into the position without them agreeing to it, or at least having some level of comfort or understanding of how the decision was made.
I'm fine with it.
Thank you, Kenan.
So Matt and Heather, I guess it seems like we have a couple different discussion points happening. I'm totally fine with however, and I'm grateful for however you all resolve fiscal year 20 with Bob Legary. Whenever that period ends, that he's no longer the interim, because we will have a new inspector. So thank you for doing that. And I know Bob will be very fair, and it will not be a problem to figure any of that out. And also, we're all pleased that there's funds for it. And so that should resolve itself pretty easily. It's some work, it's some time probably it's going to fall on Heather or however you all do that, but no problem with that. Second, I would hope if we can keep Bob Legary on as the second inspector, we would all be well served if he wants to remain in that role going forward with the new inspector. So I just don't know where that stands. I don't know if he's been asked. So that would be, him. It would be as if Brianna was still with us, and would he continue on in his role? Let's hope he does. But his life is different these days. And then third, it's back to, I guess, just reviewing the hiring process, just so I walk away clear that it sounds like we're heading towards an offer being made to Bill. And I would agree with Heather's assessment that, and I think you both are also, or all three of you, excuse me, Dylan, that, something to the effect of as soon as we're ready, because he's already was in a waiting pattern. He mentioned June 1st, which is 2 weeks from now. So whether we can do that or whatever, but June, so to get his expectations lined up. So I fully support you all going forward with that, and I'm sure the Petersham Select Board would.
All right. Thank you very much, Nancy. What I would ask is, Heather, could you try to coordinate with Dylan and Greg to set up another meeting as soon as we can, whether it's Thursday or Friday, so we can just finalize a vote on this interview to provide a proposal to see if he's interested in taking the job, but also make sure the agenda includes discussion about the Jerry, so that we can also make sure that discussion should be not just about what can he do for the next, say, maybe 2 weeks from the time that Bill Cantel accepts the job to he can actually start, but more in line, make sure the agenda allows us to discuss whether we believe he's due any money for the previous inspection work he's doing, because it was above and beyond what we expected under the original kind of employment agreement with him under the stipend. Can you do that, Heather?
Yep.
Thank you much. Are you okay with that, Dylan?
I am. I have pretty open availability those days as well, so I look forward to it.
Thank you. All right. I don't think there's anything more for us to say. We have a motion. Are we okay with ending the meeting? Do we have a motion?
For which action are you looking for, Matt?
To close this meeting.
There you go. I'll Yeah, I'll defer to Dylan on that.
Sure,
Thank
I would like to make a motion that we adjourn.
All right, I second that. I'll call for a vote.
Clark, yes.
Matt Urban, yes. All right, Greg is
Hey.
absent.
Hey, thank you guys. We really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Yeah.
If you
Thanks
need
to you
anything